Hello and welcome back to video number 2 in our free video training series on the 3 workshop design mistakes to avoid. My name is Reid Mihalko. I'm the creator of ReidAboutSex.com, Sex Geek Summer Camp, Sex Geek Conservatory, and I want to welcome you to video 2. We're super excited, and by we, I mean me and hopefully you, because I'm getting to share what I've been learning in the last over a decade of designing and running over at least 4 dozen workshops, events, college lectures at this point that have been attended by over 50,000 men and women and college-age adults, and Cuddle Party, which was my workshop that I started in 2004, which we talked about at length in video number 1. So if you haven't seen video number 1, make sure you go watch that, maybe put pause on this one and jump to the first one. But Cuddle Party is now being taught in, I think, at least 6 or 7 different countries at this point, and being taught in different languages. So the other thing I just want to say is, you know, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the fact that I've had so many people come to my workshops, I want to let you know that designing really good workshops allows for other people to teach those workshops too. And Cuddle Party was one of those babies that we just got right early on, and we were able to train and certify people to run that event to the extent that they could even translate Cuddle Party into their own languages and run Cuddle Parties in different languages. Designing a certification program or a training might not be your thing, but the principles that we're talking about here apply to those too. These are the same mistakes you want to avoid if you're doing a certification program, or if you're creating a training weekend for facilitators or things like that. So if you haven't seen the first video, please go check that out. And thank you everybody who's been leaving comments or sending me emails. It's great to see your names pop up in my inbox. I can't always respond to every email, but I love what you've all been sharing and getting out of these video training series. In video number 2, we're gonna talk about the second mistake to avoid, which I'm just gonna dive in right now, is a lot of people, and I certainly made this mistake early on, and I try to do it less. None of us are perfect, but we can always be improving, is so many people, myself included, make the mistake of putting too much information into their workshops. We create, because we're nerds and geeks, a fire hose that we force our attendees to drink from. And while you and I may really enjoy drinking from the fire hose, a lot of people out there do not. A lot of people, when you give them too much information, they retain even less of it. And there have been a lot of different studies on different aspects of adult learning styles. And I believe this applies to children's learning styles, although I'm not an expert on that. But there have been a lot of studies that basically point at we have a limited capacity, certainly, to remember things in our short-term memory. You know, studies seem to indicate that like 7 bits of information, for the most part, especially when they're kind of related, most human beings can retain 7 bits of information or like 5 bits of information. So like a phone number. Easy for a lot of people to remember for a little while in our short-term memory, especially when you just kind of, you chunk the information. You have the zip code, but you remember the main part of the phone number, those 3 numbers, dash 4 numbers, and then you remember the zip code. That's how I do it. Everybody's a little bit different, but what studies show is that most people from a lecture or a workshop can't even remember 7 points to a presentation. When we're talking chunks of information, not a number, but a concept, the number goes way down to what looks like somewhere between 3 and 5. So, you know, some places talk about the magic number is 4, and that whenever you're giving an hour-long or a 90-minute presentation, don't try to cram more than 4 bits of information or 4 concepts or contextual chunks of ideas into a presentation, because when people leave, they're not going to remember 12 different things. They're just not. And this is a principle that I just want to kind of orient you to, which is if you overwhelm your attendees and they can't remember anything from your presentation, how did you actually help them? Like, I want you to orient yourself to this, like the orientation of like, wow, my intention is to help people. That means they have to be able to remember things, to be able to implement and integrate things to transform their lives. I want to give them these 12 bits of information, but they're not going to be able to retain it. So how did you actually help them? If we put too much information and just blast them with the fire hose, and they just walk away with this experience, either the experience is they're overwhelmed, and that's bad, or they really liked your presentation, but they don't know how to follow through, then how did we actually help people? One way you can get away with overwhelm or start to minimize it is chunk your context, or the concepts, chunk them into frameworks. Perhaps you've heard me talk about the casual sex protocols, or what I lovingly refer to as slut protocols. So if you go to reidaboutssex.com/slut or /protocols, either one should work, you'll go to a video where I will invite you to sign up and download the protocols. And there are 7 casual sex protocols, and the idea is these are things that you can do to make casual sex healthier and create less drama in your life. So there are 7 basic steps, but then there are a couple of bonus steps. There are 5 bonus steps that make the whole thing really hum nicely for people who want to have healthy casual sex or healthy dating, because you can apply all this to dating as well, even non-sexual dating. But 7 steps, when going back to frameworks, we're already over the line of what people can absorb. And then I wanted to throw an extra 5 in, an extra bonus. One way you can get away with overwhelm or start to minimize it is chunk your context, or the concepts, chunk them into frameworks. So when I'm teaching this workshop, I talk about, the 12 steps, the 7 plus 5, as being a framework. The context that I'm teaching is how to minimize dating drama and casual sex drama by understanding how we fall in love unconsciously, why it's important to be able to not fall in love if you want to, like how to keep things casual, and then the protocols that you should follow. So while I have 12 steps, which seems like overwhelm, I put these 12 steps into a framework that because I have a framework, because I have steps, I can now have a worksheet or a handout, or eventually I'm going to put these steps on a fridge magnet so that college kids can put them on their refrigerators or their locker, things like that, so that those concepts can constantly be re-anchored for them. But the framework itself becomes the 3rd thing I share in that workshop. And now I've taken something that's complex, but I give it to them as kind of a takeaway to practice more of at home. And in the workshop, I'm not giving them too much information, because I'm only covering 3 things. I have my 3 bits of information, my 3 concepts. And that's how I redesigned that workshop, so that it's not overwhelm. This make sense? Another example of a workshop that I redesigned so that I wasn't just, blasting people with the fire hose, is I teach a workshop that's very popular. I teach it in a lot of stores around the country, and also in Canada. is my Negotiating Successful Threesomes workshop. And negotiating successful threesomes, for me, what I started to figure out and ask myself was, rather than in a 90-minute or 2-hour workshop, try to give people everything they need to know all in one shot and then have them leave stunned, what I started to figure out and ask myself was, like, what's the main idea or 3 ideas that I could share that would help people have more successful threesomes? And the way that I approach that is the idea of, if you imagine that you were going to be interviewed by Oprah or Larry King or whomever, and that they've got 2 minutes for you. They can fit you in at the end of the show. They've got 2 minutes for you to speak to their audience on the piece that you are an expert at. What would you teach them in 2 minutes that would change their life if you're never going to see them again? What do you share in 2 minutes that you can teach that will change their life the most? And generally speaking, when you go through that exercise and walk yourself through it, that means you can only teach like 1 or at the most 3 concepts, or introduce them to 3 concepts or 3 tools. And ideally you want to keep it to like 1 or 2 tools. So what's the most powerful tool that would help the most people, not everybody, but the most people, gain the most empowerment or make the most progress? So when I'm teaching my Negotiating Successful Threesomes workshop, like, there's a lot of stuff I can cover to help people negotiate and have healthy, successful threesomes. The way I boil it down is I teach 2 frameworks, and then I give them some visual ideas and examples, and I make it really fun, because ultimately what people need to learn how to do is talk openly about what they want in sex. And being able to talk openly in what you want in sex really helps you have better threesomes. So the foundational principle is, how do I get people to talk about something that that culture for the most part told them they shouldn't be talking about at all, and they're not going to be good at it. So I figured out that this is the main challenge most people have, and so how do I address that? And I teach 2 frameworks, and then I get people to practice talking about threesomes and how to envision threesomes so they know what they want to ask for. Those 2 frameworks are the Embrace the Awkward formula, which is how do you break the ice and kind of keep break the ice and then keep the ball rolling. And then we give that a context, and the Embrace the Awkward formula, which you can find at, you guessed it, ReidAboutSex.com/awkward. The Embrace the Awkward formula isn't just for threesomes. You can use it in all sorts of relationship situations. You can even use it in business when you need to, overcome the awkward, because people get awkward and then they freeze. So being able to break the ice and keep the ball moving, really useful in that workshop for negotiating successful threesomes. The second framework I teach is the Safer Sex Elevator Speech, which we talked about in the first video, but if you're just tuning in now and you haven't watched the first one, that's ReidAboutSex.com/elevator, another framework that helps people talk about their fears and their needs, wants and desires around healthier, safer sex. Really important when you want to invite 2 more people into your bed. And then the third piece that I do in the workshop is we do kind of a improv comedy, miming with people from the audience different positions that people can get into when you have 3 people in bed rather than 2 people. And then we have audience participation where they're yelling out positions and everybody's trying on, different positions. They're not actually having sex. This is PG-13, but we make it really fun to help people anchor that it's okay to talk about this stuff and that it can be awkward and funny, and that doesn't make it wrong. So rather than in a 90-minute or 2-hour workshop, try to give people everything they need to know all in one shot and then have them leave stunned. They might be impressed with your vast knowledge, but if they can't retain anything, did you really change their life? For that 2-hour or 90-minute workshop, I'm focusing on 2 frameworks that I think are going to be most helpful, and then an activity, because now it's at the end of the workshop, and people might be a little bit tired, or I'm starting to lose their attention. And then the foundational principle is, how do I get people to talk about something that that culture for the most part told them they shouldn't be talking about at all, and they're not going to be good at it. And that, keeping it to 3 points, fits into that the magic number 4 framework. And it gives me lots of room to be able to take questions, to kind of let the workshop breathe a little bit. If I was invited to teach at a store and they can only give me 45 minutes, then I would pick one framework and probably ask Q&As, or do one framework and then do a 5-minute version of the interactive exercise. So the other thing here is, as you start to geek out and realize what to avoid, you start to get more clarity on what are the important things to teach, so that then, even if it's a podcast and they're like, oh, Reid, we want to talk to you about threesomes, we've got 10 minutes. I'm like, oh, okay, I can teach that. And I can teach those ideas really quickly in 10 minutes. I have the worksheets and the download links on my website, so I can point people to more resources. And as we'll cover in the 3rd video, after I help them, in this instance, like the podcast instance, I helped you for free, I can point you at other materials for you to go deeper with more structure and support, and those materials and that kind of structure are usually the things that I invite people to pay me for my time and my efforts. So this is also how you start to be able to build a business. And when we come back in our 3rd video, we'll deal with the 3rd mistake for people to avoid. And that mistake is actually one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on in my career, which is why I wasn't making a living. And when I figured that one out and made some adjustments, ta-da! I started to be able to pay my bills. And now I get to have the privilege of running around and being on the internet, being a dork and a geek and helping people and paying my bills. So share below what was useful for you today about avoiding the mistake of too much information. What was the takeaway for you on how you can apply this to your own workshops and curriculum and lectures? Again, if you have existing workshops and things like that, you might want to share how you can apply these things to go in and tinker and tweak and make your workshops even more powerful and more fulfilling for folks, and hopefully more fun and easy for you. This is Reid Mihalko signing off. Leave a comment, share this video, this series with a friend, and I just want to acknowledge you and appreciate you for being somebody who cares about this stuff, wants to get better at it so that we can just make the world a better place. I super appreciate you being a part of the sex geek community, however you identify with that. Leave a comment. Next video coming up soon. Thank you so much.